Hi, I'm Metta Spencer. Today, all right, hold on, we're going to deal with small modular nuclear reactors. You ready for that? Okay, it's going to be a big day. I've got two guys here who know a thing or two about that subject and are going to share their opinions with us as well as their actual factual expertise. Michael Barnard is the chief strategist for TFIE Strategy Incorporated. I don't know what that stands for. Now, we are also have the pleasure of his friend, Paul Martin, who is a Canadian chemical engineer who's interested in energy. And he designs pilot plants for the chemical process industry. So welcome, guys.
Excellent. TFIE, by the way, stands for The Future is Electric.
Oh, very good. All right.
I agree with that statement.
We're going to talk about small modular nuclear reactors, or small modular reactors, or small and medium reactors, SMRs, SMNRs. It's a bit of an alphabet soup, and some of those SMRs are MSRs, molten salt reactors, just to add fusion to the mix. But we are here. Let's just start by defining what the heck we're talking about. Modular nuclear reactor. There's a few parts to the definition. One is it's smaller than a normal size reactor. Because of the laws of thermodynamics and the way scaling works, it makes sense to try and make nuclear reactors about a gigawatt in capacity. You know, that's about the standard size. It kind of hunts up and down from that. And over the decades, that's where they've kind of trended to and Paul will talk about that. He's an expert in that space. Small modular nuclear reactors are under 300 megawatts. So under a third the size, you know, because the idea is that you can manufacture something that scale in a factory, and then you can put it on a truck and you can ship it to a site and you can plop it down, and you're not spending all your time engineering on the site. It's like prefab homes. So small modular reactors, they have a bunch of promises that they make, and they're not going to be able to keep them. So one is they're not going to be able to achieve the economies of scale for manufacturing many of them in a single site. And the second part is they lose that gigawatt scale of advantages that Paul is an expert in, and he'll talk about. So they're not going to be cheaper per unit of electricity regardless. They're not going to be faster to build. They're not going to be cheaper as a result. Now, then we get into the other things. They keep talking about putting them in like Inuvik and on old dead coal plants. And they're not suitable for those because of massive security costs for any nuclear reactor technology. 200 to 300 megawatts, it's still a nuclear reactor. It still requires several overlapping layers of security, from site to municipal to subnational to national to international scales of security, all of which comes with a massive cost. The next point is they're still going to take a long time and a lot of money to tear them apart and decommission them and deal with the radioactive material inherent to the nuclear fuel chain and waste chain. And they're still going to require the federally funded liability insurance caps. In the United States right now, every cost above $13 billion in terms of civil suits or other suits for costs of a nuclear disaster are paid for by the taxpayer. And that's true in every country in the world.
It's a massive unwritten, unspoken subsidy.
And I'll just close with this thought of my thesis. Fukushima cost about $1 trillion. And
so far.
So no, I figure that's going to be the end cost.
You think so? Okay.
Yeah, it's about 800. It's about 800 billion that I've accounted for, and I assume I've missed some stuff. But my assertion is that it's going to be, around $1 trillion US, which is a bit more than 13 billion. So that's the thesis. We'll say though that Paul and I are in concurrence. We actually like nuclear technology just fine. We don't have a problem with it. As a technology, it has proven itself to be low carbon, low pollution, and safe from any metric you use per terawatt hour of generated electricity. The global nuclear supply, nuclear electrical generation industry has been really good. It's down there with wind and solar in terms of those metrics.
Are you counting in access to radiation by the miners?
Still, if you look at the supply chain, miners don't die of radiation poisoning particularly. It's just not, it's a bit of a nothing burger from a safety perspective, but this doesn't mean that Paul or I think that nuclear has any particular future in electrical generation, so it's a wash. We just say, we're not concerned about many of the things that people are concerned about.
I think nuclear can be adequately safe, and I think it makes low greenhouse gas emissions electricity. And I think those 2 points are pretty difficult to argue with, although you can, what's adequately safe mean? We can have a long discussion about that. But I don't think nuclear is cheap. I don't think it's cheap now, and I don't think it's going to be cheap in the future. And it's not fast, and it doesn't play well with cheap electricity in the form of wind and solar. So its future is fraught. It's difficult to imagine. Anyway,
so when you talk about Fukushima, you're only concerned about the $1 trillion. You're not worried that there's a whole lot of people who can't live around there or shouldn't be living around there, and that sort of thing. You're not worried about the Chernobyl safety record, because I have to, from having interviewed people who've done a much more thorough examination of the health effects of Chernobyl than the World Health Organization or IAEA will ever admit to. I would say that anybody should take a good look at that.
So what I would say instead,
that worries me. That would
the way I would
me.
put it is this: so all forms of electrical generation, production, use, they all have environmental and social and political and economic impacts. All of them do. Wind does, solar does, all of them do. Okay, so we have to be careful of not making a nirvana fallacy argument, which says this thing has this problem, therefore it's no good. So, because what that inevitably does is it sticks us with the present. Right? Change isn't possible. So when you look at nuclear, you have to look at nuclear in the proper context. In the 1970s, when the nuclear in Ontario, where I live, was built, the alternative wasn't wind and solar. It was coal. And if you compare and contrast the risks to health of nuclear versus the certainty of impact to health from coal, there really is no comparison.
Yeah, no, I'll add on to this.
Yeah, go for it.
Remember, Metta, that part of my background is public health. I helped build the world's most sophisticated public health surveillance solution for communicable disease and outbreak management and vaccination management. It's used across Canada right now for COVID. It's used through the Middle East. I speak to epidemiologists moderately regularly and public health experts still, but I used to speak to them daily. And I've assessed the epidemiological health risks of nuclear power, including the disasters, from that moderately knowledgeable perspective, as a technologist and someone who's experienced in statistical analysis of electrical generation and other types of failures. And it's just a bit of a nothing burger. Here's a statistic for you. You want a real statistic? Every coal plant kills 78 people a year.
All right. Tell me this. What number of deaths from Chernobyl would it take for you to say, yeah, that's bad?
Well, how many deaths were there? There were actually no deaths directly attributable. There is a statistical likelihood of 26. Now, I've done the math on this, Metta, and this is not.
No, there were people who died in the Chernobyl disaster, definitely, as a result of the emergency response. And there were people that died from increased cancer risk as well. But the point is, but the point is this, that one has to look at those risks relative to their reasonable alternatives.
No, just tell me this. How many deaths would it take for you to say, this is serious, you shouldn't play with this stuff? Would a million do? Would a million do it?
Well, let's think about it for a second.
A million do it? No, yes or not?
Well,
no, that's not a fair argument.
Michael, you are absolutely wrong. This is the first time I've disagreed with you, but you are not taking account of real evidence that has been ignored in other places by WHO, by AEA, you know what I'm saying, IAEA. And really, there are Russians who would claim that 1 million people have died of Chernobyl.
And anyway, Metta, Paul and I agree that this is a red herring and it's an irrelevancy, because nuclear is not going to be part of the solution set for going forward. Small modular reactors are not going to be a part of it going forward. We prefer just to ignore this entire argument because it's irrelevant to the reasons why nuclear will diminish in use over time and small modular reactors will go. We're
Okay.
agreeing on the outcome. We think that the argument about health is immaterial, and we can agree to disagree on that, Metta. But let's talk about why small modular reactors
Not till
are
you
not
let
a
me
threat.
go on with one thing. That is, I will be squishy soft on some of the dangers about, how dangerous is Pickering or Bruce, et cetera. I don't know. How many safeguards have been put in. I don't know. You guys are engineers. I'm open to discussion about that. Where I'm really not at all open for discussion is the whole issue of reprocessing, and the fact that whenever you have a reprocessing operation going on, you make available material that would be of great interest to anybody wanting to make a nuclear bomb. And that's where I'm not at all willing to be. I don't care how much you say it would save money. It wouldn't make any difference to me. I would not accept something that is going to increase the probability of a nuclear bomb.
And Michael, part of Michael's argument is going to be the security risks are real. And I agree the security risks are real. So we can agree on that. And we can talk about the health and safety risks another day.
Okay. And to be clear, Metta, part of the reason that Paul and I just ignore that is because you don't have to make those arguments to win a rational discussion on much less heated points. And let's talk about the less heated points, right?
Okay.
Yeah,
I'll go for that.
Yeah. So let's talk a bit more about small modular reactors. Okay. So there's small modular nuclear reactors. Up to a point, we've been building these things since the 1950s. We've got a bunch operating around the world, kind of, in a certain definition of the world. We've got 18 of them in India, for example. Originally they're building some Westinghouse stuff and some CANDU stuff, believe it or not. Then they built their own CANDU version, the pressurized heavy water reactor, which is what a CANDU was, our Canadian tech. And they've got 18 of them running in India right now. And Russia was building a bunch for, basically nuclear powered icebreakers. And they put one on land they're planning to put one on land to power a lighthouse, basically.
And there are lots of them running in the U.S. Navy as well.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of them running as marine power supplies for military vessels.
Yeah,
but the civil marine note on the RATM 200 is Russia's icebreaker. It's not if you believe that Russia actually has civilian icebreakers, then as opposed to some sort of relationship to their military, then that's a civilian one. Argentina's building one, and it's out there. And guess what? It's been under construction on and off for over a decade, and it's like pretty much a nothing burger. And China's building a couple, but I think China's actually fueled theirs now, so they're actually expecting to start generating electricity. They're not very big. They're not very meaningful. Point is, we've had small nuclear reactors since the 1950s generating electricity around the world. So one of the question marks you have to ask yourself is, what the heck is different today that makes small reactors better when they've mostly been gone away?
Yeah, in my read, Michael, of the history is that we started out building small reactors. And we went bigger because we knew that would make them cheaper. It would make the kilowatt hours that they make less expensive. That's why we went bigger. We didn't go bigger because it was fun engineering or because people wanted to make more money. We went bigger because we thought that would make electricity cheaper. And in fact, you remember the infamous statement that somebody made that, nuclear, if it was built at a large enough scale, it would make electricity that would be too cheap to meter. Remember?
Paul, I've actually traced that statement, and it was a purported statement about potential for fusion electricity.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Isn't that great?
Isn't that great? Yeah, and it
Well,
was.
yeah, fusion is the number of years into the future that fusion will be a feasible and useful option for making electricity is one of the constants of the universe. It's like pi and Planck's constant, and the gravitational constant. It's constant, and it's always in the future. So it's always going to be the energy source of the future, never the present.
China, by the way, just managed to sustain fusion for 30 whole seconds.
Yep.
Woo! This is the kind of the technological explosion slide. There have been 57 different technologies across 18 different technology sets. Let me just see if I've got that slide next. Yeah, 18 different technology types that have been tried over the past 60 years. That means that no one can figure out, it's not, like, let's take wind turbines as a different example. Wind turbines, 3 different people, engineers in 3 different countries, Scotland, Denmark, and I think in Illinois or Ohio in the United States, within a year of each other around 1890, all started generating electricity with wind turbines. One of them was 3 blades kind of rotating slowly. It would look like a windmill. It was not what we would consider a wind turbine today, but it was still. 2 of them went this way, and one of them was a horizontal, a vertical axis wind turbine that was like an egg beater kind of thing. And over the decades, all wind turbines have merged into a single technology type. 3 blades, tall mast, horizontal axis. And that's because the technology optimization curve leads to a better choice rather than worse choices in the physical space. What this says is there's no technological optimization curve that's leading to a single solution in the nuclear space. That's been a strong problem in the nuclear space for decades. One of the studies recently that nuclear advocates pointed to as, hey, here's what we should do to fix nuclear, was a study which found that innovation in nuclear energy was actually contraindicated. It's the only technical space where changing things to be better made things slower and more costly every single time. And the small modular reactor space is exactly that type of thing. The argument I make on this is that in order for a small modular nuclear reactor to achieve significant economies of being built in factories, a whole bunch of countries would have to agree on a single technical standard. They'd all, like the F-35 fighter, the
Exactly.
F-35, right? And then they would have
Exactly.
to agree that they wouldn't change it for each country and change it for each site. They would accept a manufactured object. So in other words, there would have to be an international collaboration of multiple countries to build a single technology and not allow any variance of it. So it's not a free market solution, by the way. This is specifically.
And then you would have to order thousands of them at a time.
And then you would have
single orders.
Yep. It
See,
is like
this is what I do for a living. I design and build little chemical plants in a factory. We design them and build them in pieces that we can ship on trucks. Okay, and it's called modular fabrication. And it has tremendous advantages. The big advantages that it has is it allows higher quality fabrication under more controlled conditions with higher labor productivity. So each worker, instead of running around back and forth to their pickup truck to get tools, they have tools at hand, designed to do the job that they need to do. But it's not mass production. Okay, it's not mass production. It's factory construction, which is not the same thing. And that's the kicker. This is the confusion that's being used by people to say, this time it's going to be different. Yeah, nuclear is slow and expensive to build. We're going to fix it by making them small in a factory, and that's going to make all the problems go away. And it's based on a misunderstanding of what they're doing.
Yeah, they're not going to be doing a Model Ford assembly line.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let me ask what they say. I mean, I haven't talked to any of the guys who are promoting this, But when they say we have the handy dandy new solution to all your problems, what is their main claim? That it's going to be cheaper, or that it's going to be safer, or what?
Well, they claim that they claim both of those things.
They do.
They claim that it's going to be safer. And as I've said, the nuclear track record across the globe, across the entire things, nuclear is down with wind and solar in terms of safety per terawatt hour of electrical generation. We won't get into that red herring argument, but nuclear can be safe, and it has been safe in a lot of sites around the world.
What they're claiming, though, is that certain ways of making these nuclear reactors are intrinsically safe. So they're walk away safe. That's the claim. Okay, I don't buy it, but that's the claim. That they're walk away safe. That something goes wrong, you push the big red shiny button and run out the door. The thing shuts itself down. It doesn't take any intervention from machinery. There's no backup system that has to be there to shut it down. It just cools down, and when it cools down, everything solidifies and it stops making heat. And that's the claim.
True, but that passive nuclear
is there somebody who has to push the little red button and run, or what can it if somebody goes?
A lot of this is automated. Honestly,
yeah.
The passive safety features have been in all nuclear electrical generation plants since the 1980s, designed and built since the 1980s. Some of the Fukushima one didn't have those passive safety features, which is part of the reason it's a problem. The Chernobyl one didn't have those passive safety features, which is why it's a problem. But if you took a Toshiba Westinghouse, now Brookfield, AP1000, it has passive safety features that are not dissimilar from what they're promising for small modular nuclear reactors, and it's irrelevant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. It's an argument that's not relevant.
Well, look, I agreed to not be too obstructionist, but there is a guy named Gregory Yatchko. He was the head of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission under most of Obama's tenure. And he wrote a book saying that he no longer believes in nuclear because he found that when he was, of course, it was his job to make sure to catch all the safety risks, all the hazards. And when he would try to tighten up something that needed attention, he couldn't do it because there were too many powerful political forces, lobbyists who had an interest in keeping things cheap or keeping the thing going and not wanting to interrupt the flow of things. And they would always win in any confrontation. Therefore, he said, you cannot make it safe because the political forces are such that there's a great incentive for people to continue doing things that are unsafe. So, and he gives a lot, I read his book, he gives a lot of examples of times when he tried to clean something up and he couldn't do it.
Let me give you an interesting side argument to that I think supports your point. The nuclear industry on this issue has this narrative that it tells itself. Okay, and it tells everybody else through its marketing. And the narrative kind of goes like this. The big bad greenies, the no-nukers, the anti-nuclear activists, burdened our poor industry with such an onerous regulatory program that it makes it impossible to build them fast enough and cheap enough. And the way we're going to fix this is by making them smaller. Okay, and I don't buy it. I think nuclear is adequately safe when it's built in accordance with a necessarily tough regulatory regime. I don't think making them smaller and especially distributing them all over the country in numerous sites makes them safer. I don't think it makes the burden of regulatory control any less at all. I think it makes it more, for the security reasons and others. And I think Michael will get into that.
Well, and I go at it from a different perspective. So leaving aside the inherent safety or unsafety of this stuff, globally, statistically, nuclear energy has been a lot better for human beings than coal, but it comes with a bunch of prices which are hidden. And I've been looking at the economics, like that $13 billion liability cap versus the $1 trillion of Fukushima's economic costs to Japan. That's an unrepresented economic burden. And grid strategists are going to look at that and go, wait a minute, there's a gap here, because do wind and solar require a liability cap or have the potential for $1 trillion of economic damage? And the answer is no. But here's part of this hidden burden. So let's talk about what small modular reactors don't solve at all, which is the requirement for security. Because, Metta, to your point, I'm less concerned about reprocessing fuel into high-grade nuclear weapons technology than I'm about reasonably high-density fissile material, radioactive material that gets wrapped in a dirty bomb with a fertilizer bomb and gets exploded in a city center.
I'm desperately worried about that too.
That's a terrorist wet dream, and it's much easier to achieve than a actual working nuclear weapon. And so looking at this, all of these costs are related to preventing shady states and actors and terrorist groups, local, whether domestic white supremacist terrorists or foreign terrorists, from getting their hands on sufficient fissile material to create a radioactive dirty bomb, which doesn't explode with nuclear force, but creates massive public terror. And so this is a workup that I did from all the publicly available material, so it's imperfect, for the United States, for all the costs for security for all the reactors. So every reactor per year has $52 million worth of security US associated with it, right there. Now, only 18 million of that is paid for by the operational owner. So I think of Bruce Nuclear, it's probably $70 million a year for security for Bruce Nuclear's plants, and they're only paying like 25 million of that. Because at the international scale, you mentioned the IEA, there's a $200 million budget, $250 million US budget for the IEAE. That acronym kills me.
I can't say it either.
The International Atomic Energy Association. Anyway, that organization, a quarter of $1 billion fund, mostly provided by the United States, by the way, 200 million, for civil nuclear generation plants. So that's a subsidy from various governments, including the Canadian government. Then at the national, state, and municipality level, oh, look, there's like 26
million. Hold on, now, wait a minute. I wish, can you have a pointer? And when you're talking about something, point to it. When you're talking about the IAEA, you're talking, this is what you call international. Is that right? And we're going downward, and you're going to explain.
Yep.
Okay, go ahead. But keep me informed about where we are on this graph.
So I know you know Paul Verbos, and Paul and I have had this conversation, and he was with a program director with the National Science Foundation, worked with the Obama-Biden administration on climate change, and dealt with nuclear security concerns peripherally, and just had his mind blown when he got into that. But part of my conversation with Paul was that each of the, when we think about security, we do not think about a single layer of security, but we think about overlapping shells of security, so that for any given type of thing, there's 2 or 3 chances that something will catch a failure or a trip or an incursion of security. What you're always looking for is multiple types of detection and multiple types of defense. And so what that means is that we've got this international shell for nuclear non-proliferation treaties and processing treaties, to your concern, Metta. The national level, there's multiple national organizations. Nuclear generation in every country is uniquely has its own nuclear electrical generation organization. Wind and solar and hydro don't have their own organizations at the federal level, but nuclear does. And that's part of that. They have a security circuit for it. There's an entire kind of secret nuclear security force in the United States that nobody talks about. It's got a lot of money associated with it. They've got big budgets and they do exercises. Then at the state level, every state that has, every subnational jurisdiction, Ontario or other, at the state level, that subnational level, they have people, bureaucrats and security forces who are focused on coordinating federal down to municipal, down to site security for those types of things. So this $26 million goes down there. And then at the municipal level, every, like Bruce Nuclear or Pickering, let's take Pickering because you mentioned Pickering. Pickering Police Department has a whole bunch of training and exercises and procedures and staff devoted to the shell of security around the Pickering nuclear plant. And they have to coordinate with the plant, and they have to coordinate with the province, and they have to coordinate with federal exercises, and they run through training exercises. So there's a bunch of money spent for security at those levels. And then you finally get down to the site, and the site has typically 3 levels of shells of security. Like 5-10 kilometers out from the site, there's this sensor set that is looking for suspicious activity. And then you get to the fence, and the fence is typically tall and electrified and got armed guards and stuff like that. And you've got this entire another set there. And then inside, there's sites inside the plant where the high radioactive material occur and the sensitive controls are. And there's another level of specialized security around that. So they spend a lot of money at these multiple layers of defense. And the majority of it is subsidized by the taxpayers. For the U.S. nuclear fleet full life cycle, I estimate it's $1 trillion cradle to grave for the current set of nuclear reactors, because that security has to persist at the site for the entire duration of decommissioning, which is about a century. Because once again, it's dirty bombs. And so we sit there and we say, well, wind turbines and solar panels, let's talk about the equivalent security concerns. There are no security concerns.
No, wait a minute. I'm sort of thick up here about these things. Now, show me. You've got these 3 columns.
Yep.
The first,
this one is 1 reactor for 1 year. This is from the start of construction to the end of decommissioning.
Per reactor. Yeah.
$7.8 billion of security for the over a century that it takes from the start of construction to the end of decommissioning. 7.8 billion of security costs.
Now you multiply that by how many reactors you've got to get this final column. Is that right?
Yeah, in the United States, there are 99 operating reactors today, but there are like 135 or something, 116
so you
reactors
multiply
in total.
78 something by however many reactors there are in the US, and that tells you this $1 trillion total for the entire fleet over the life cycle of the whole shebang. Is that right?
It's $1 trillion of majority publicly funded money that is invisible and not costed into any arguments about nuclear power.
Hidden subsidy.
Now
that's nuclear's status quo, hidden subsidy.
Now, what this turns into, it's about it turns into $4 billion per year in the United States as a nuclear hidden subsidy, on top of the $1.7 billion of tax breaks they get, the $1.1 billion the Ohio government gave to a reactor, along with $60 million worth of bribes to keep the reactor operating, along with the money that the Biden-Harris administration are going to spend to keep the existing nuclear fleet going and spend on small modular nuclear reactor research. There's a lot of money that's being spent in public money on the nuclear industry. I think it should just go to wind and solar personally, and to pumped hydro and stuff.
Yeah, and storage and you know, those expenditures would actually result in some decarbonization. But this small modular nuclear reactor thing, it's actually a little bit more nefarious than even that. It's not just people betting on an idea of, you know, let's try it. Let's see if we can make the reactors cheaper. We'll make them in a factory and that'll make them cheaper. And, you know, maybe it'll work out. What's really going on, or what seems to be really going on, is it's very popular with conservative premiers in Canada who are closeted, at least, climate change denialists, like Doug Ford.
New Brunswick, Kenny, Ford.
Yeah, exactly. And, it's very popular with these people who know that their population wants them to make nice noises about doing something about decarbonization, but they don't actually want to spend any significant money doing it. So you see, the idea is you put a few millions or tens of millions of dollars into these small modular nuclear reactor development programs, and it looks like you're doing something for decarbonization. But since they won't actually be built in any quantity, in any number that would be sufficient to decarbonize anything, you're safe. You don't have to worry about the government being on the hook for spending any significant money on decarbonization. It's, look, we've got this, we're building the Deus ex machina that's going to lower the god from the sky and resolve all the plot problems with decarbonization, like in a Greek play. We're building it. Don't worry. It's going to be a small modular nuclear reactor.
To Paul's specific point, the UN IPCC 1.5 degree reports made it clear that we had till 2030 to substantially decarbonize our economies. 55% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions to achieve that 1.5%. I think that's completely unlikely, unfortunately. I think we're going to be into RCP 6.0, which is 2 to 3.7 degrees of warming. I suspect we'll manage to keep it under 3 degrees. It'll be really bad for a lot of people, and I'm fighting desperately to, as best I can to improve that. But let's just take that 2030 stake in the sand, misrepresented as it has been by climate change denialists and a lot of conservative actors over time. 2030 means we have to have a bunch of working electrical generation that is low carbon and massively decarbonize the grid by 2030. The global organization devoted to promoting and advocating small modular nuclear reactors says that by 2030, the first small modular nuclear reactor will be commercialized and deployed. Oh, wait, so we need to do a bunch of action in the next 9 years, and this technology is not going to be available until the end of that 9 years.
Adam is here. He must have intercepted a juicy question.
If maybe you could speak a bit about thorium as a fuel source, because we hear a lot about thorium reactors and what role would thorium have in the future of these technologies.
Every time I hear anybody mention thorium, I know they have no understanding of nuclear technologies, electrical generation, or anything serious, and it's irrelevant to the conversation. There is exactly one country that is pretending to do anything with thorium, which is India, and they are literally doing as close to nothing as it is humanly possible. Thorium is a complete red herring, and it's not worth spending any more time on.
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that. I think thorium is a distraction. The problem with nuclear isn't a shortage of uranium, nor is it the cost of uranium. And that's all thorium fixes. The only thing thorium fixes.
And I'm going to be really blunt. Metta's specific concern about nuclear fuel reprocessing, thorium supply chains, fuel chains require the exact technologies required for creating nuclear explosive materials.
Oh.
It is the same prescribed technologies that you don't want in the hands of bad actors.
SMR things, do they involve reprocessing?
Molten salt reactors and breeder reactors are reprocessing reactors. Thorium, the great hope for the thorium fans, is explicitly in that space. Some small modular reactors are molten salt reactors and breeder reactors. Not all are.
You're going to have to fluff that out a bit, because I couldn't absorb all that.
I think that there's more relevant stuff to talk about that Paul want to get to. And I think I want to return to the discussion of the deferral of climate action through pretense of nuclear technologies. That is, I think, a much more relevant subject, because there's a significant amount of nuclear focus, and there's a significant amount of lobbying that's going on. There's a significant PR push to put nuclear back on the piece, and that's around the small modular reactors.
Yeah, it's the same. It's the same kind of mass distraction that's happening with hydrogen, in my opinion. It's exactly the same thing. I've referred to this as hopium, a hopium addiction. Where we take people's hope of a better future and we weaponize it against them to separate them and their governments from their money. And that's what's going on.
At direct air capture is the same thing. And Metta, you've had a lot of people with carbon capture stuff. You and I have had a show directly devoted to that. These are things which make the promise to everybody that they don't have to change a thing, and some magic bullet will take care of it in the future at somebody else's expense.
Exactly.
And I make a different comparison, which is, I'm just going to say I live one of the best lifestyles in the world. I live in downtown Yale Town. I've got crows and cherry trees outside my window and hummingbirds. I can walk to the seawall in 5 minutes and walk in one of the best urban environments in the world. I have access to amazing diversity of people and experiences. My entire carbon footprint for electrical heat and cooling is 90 kilograms a year, and I don't need to drive anywhere. If I did drive, I'd get an electric car, and I'd get an electric transit. I eat really well, and this is a very low carbon lifestyle that I happen to lead, which is also incredibly gracious and has zero hair shirts involved. We don't have to change for the worse. There's no hair shirts involved, but people are saying, oh, the greenies say we have to give up meat and give up cars and give up all this other stuff.
Oh yeah, and destroy capitalism too.
And destroy capitalism.
That's another lovely one. Oh yeah, we have to destroy capitalism because without destroying capitalism, you can't decarbonize. I'm sorry, that's just horse effluent. You know?
We have to fix some aspects of capitalism. I would strongly recommend reading.
There's capitalism. There's problems with capitalism that exacerbate the problem of decarbonization. That's not the same thing at all as saying you have to destroy capitalism to decarbonize. Yeah. It's just foolishness.
I strongly recommend Mark Carney's book, Values, Building a Better Future for Everybody. And I strongly recommend Debt, The First 5,000 Years, another book that I've just finished off recently. I also strongly recommend Modern Monetary Theory to get an alternative perspective on these things. There's a big distraction going on with small modular reactors, especially by conservative politicians, to create a pretense of action without the actuality of action. And New Brunswick is the only province outside of Canada with a nuclear reactor. I discovered something recently when I was looking at a hydrogen scam, hydrogen perpetual motion scam they fell for, which cost them $23 million. I was on CBC about this one.
Joy Scientific. Yeah, I called that one. I called that spade a shovel, that's for sure.
But I discovered that they actually managed, when they were doing the refurbishment of the nuclear reactor in New Brunswick, to waste more governmental money than all the refurbishments of the Blue Nose in Nova Scotia, which takes some doing. The Blue Nose was a public expenditure debacle, and the nuclear reactor, they left a chunk of wood from construction in the boiler the last time they did a refurbishment, and it cost them $50 million. It's just hilarious, but they still like nuclear power, and you know, just bizarre. Now, I did promise we get to a very specific, slightly technical element of the discussion.
Yeah, so one of the key arguments of the small modular nuclear reactor crowd is that they're going to mass produce them in factories, and that will take care of the problem of them being smaller in scale. And whereas the opposite happened, you know, in history, we built smaller reactors and then we started making them bigger to get their marginal cost. In other words, their cost for every kilowatt hour to be smaller. And the reason, I have to explain why scale matters and why bigger scale is the way that you get lower cost per kilowatt hour or per ton of product if you're making a chemical or something like that. And the reason is basic physics. So let's take as an example this picture on the left-hand side here. We've got a pipe, one pipe, and the pipe can carry 1 unit of flow at a given amount of energy loss. And it costs 1 unit of money to make that pipe, like to build that pipe. Well, if we make the pipe 10 times the diameter, we can now carry over 100 times the flow. It's not just 100 times, it's over 100 times the flow because the fluid mechanics get better. And it doesn't even cost 10 times as much pipe material. It's less than 10 times as much fabrication cost. There's 10 times as much material in it, but the fabrication cost is actually lower than that. And this basic reason that, you know, when things get bigger, they get more efficient in use of money, and money is, you know, a proxy for all the effort that goes into it, the energy and the labor and all that stuff. This is the reason for economy of scale. And what we find is that pipe and equipment, you know, tanks and pumps and all manner of things, they all scale in this kind of way. When you make them bigger, the marginal cost drops. And what we find is that for the average thing, the average of all costs in a plant to a first approximation, if you make the plant 10 times bigger, the cost goes up only by a factor of 4. So that's 10 raised to the power of 0.6. Okay. And that's so powerful.
This is not a universal law. What this is a law where stuff moves past stuff and through stuff. I make an argument, and I make an argument about this, that wind turbines and solar panels have some of the advantages of one of both of these. Mostly solar panels and wind turbines, we build a lot of identical ones in factories and we ship them and we assemble them. It takes 24 hours of construction to put up a 2.6 megawatt wind turbine for the entire process over 3 days. That's really fast. And we can put in a lot of solar panels in really fast because they're cookie cutters. The cookie cutter advantage applies because we've got well over 300,000 wind turbines, well over 1 million wind turbine blades, and about 3 billion solar panels that have been deployed so far. I've done the math. It's like 3 billion. I must be wrong. No, it's 3 billion solar panels. Wow, that's a lot. But wind turbines have also gotten bigger. Wind turbines have gotten farther off the ground because the wind is a bit better there, the laminar flow is better, but the blades have gotten longer so that they can do what this diagram shows. This small diagram here, oh, this big thing here, this is not 10 times wider, it's 100 times more surface area, volume flowing through with better laminar flow. And wind turbine blades, the longer you make them, you can get more of that energy out of a greater expanse of wind with a lot less material.
Exactly. And that's what vertical scale is all about. This is what we're talking about. This is what's called vertical scale, or what Michael calls vertical scale, and what we in the industry, chemical industry, just call economy of scale. And economy of scale has certain breakdowns, right? So one of the breakdowns is when you make the thing too big, okay, you make it so big that it becomes an effort of heroics rather than one of just, you know, getting smarter about how to build things. So when you have to go to extreme heroics, you know, you have to build a brand new ship, the first of its kind, biggest in the world, in order to carry the thing that you're going to build, then the advantage of building it in a factory probably goes away, right? So there are exceptions to this rule of economy of scale, but let's just put it in the simplest terms possible for, yeah, exactly, for my clients. Okay, so we build these plants, these little plants, not nuclear plants, but chemical plants that make a product, okay? And we build them in a factory, and we build them in pieces that we can ship on a truck. So we do exactly what the nuclear guys want to do, except not nuclear. And when you apply it to a plant, if I used 6 because Michael drew a nice picture with six little plants versus one big plant. So let's imagine we've got 2 options. We can build one big plant with 6 times the output, or we can build 6 little plants. Well, look at the differences in the cost there. Okay, the 6 little plants might cost 5 times as much as one little plant. They get a little bit cheaper because you reproduce and use some things a second time and so on. But the economy there of numbering them up, making more than one of them, is modest. And in contrast, if we built a bigger one, it would cost only 3 times as much as the little plant. And yet it's producing 6 times as much. So it's, the cost per unit of whatever it's making is half. Yeah, it's half what it is for the others. And that's the deal killer for small modular nuclear reactors right there. Because what we're talking about is how much each kilowatt hour costs.
And to be clear, wind and solar win, because you can reasonably, because they don't depend upon the same economics of scaling and laminar flow through pipes, you can make an awful lot of them, and then you have optimization of manufacturing, supply chains, distribution, transportation, construction, cookie cutter deployment plants, trained, skilled people, lower, all those things that SMR people do. But we have, once again, over 300,000 utility scale wind turbines and over 1 million wind turbine blades and over 3 billion solar panels.
Yep.
Those are numbers that actually lead to massive global supply chain economies of scale.
This picture that I've got here with the relative amounts of money, that's assuming we build all those 6 little plants on one site. So we still only have one site. You know, we don't have to build 6 parking lots and 6 administrative buildings and 6 shower rooms for the operators and all that sort of thing. We're building one of those and we're putting 6 little plants on it. Now, if we put 6 little plants on 6 different sites, we've got 6 parking lots and 6 administrative buildings and all those things, they don't get cheaper as you build more of them.
Those security costs we talked about,
exactly,
they go to every one of those sites. Now,
and the thing is, this is so obvious to me. Like it's so, it's viscerally obvious to me. It makes me upset that people are pretending that they don't know it.
Yeah,
and they're pretending that they don't know it. They know this.
I'll take the NuScale example because NuScale is the only SMR plant that is anywhere near anything. Right, so they're going to put it on a single site, and they're going to put 12 of these little mini reactors on the site. But the consortium of municipalities they got from Utah and surrounding states to fund this, well, most of them backed out because costs kept going up, schedule kept increasing. Does this sound familiar to the nuclear generation industry? Yes, it does. And then last year, one of the Trump administration's last acts was to give a $1.5 billion bailout to NuScale to keep them alive in the absence of customers who are willing to invest in delivering them. So that's the NuScale model. Now let's look at Bill Gates' Terrapower, because Bill Gates is a massive proponent of small modular reactors, and his Terrapower facility is supposedly small modular reactors. Guess what his most recent initiative is? A 1.1 gigawatt Terrapower design. Oh, we're back to the gigawatt scale, not small modular reactor. So we're back
because that makes cheaper kilowatt hours. That's why.
And it doesn't, because it's still the same problem of nuclear reactors. So
it makes them cheaper than if you make them tiny and you make lots of them.
That's the point. This is the point, Metta. This is kind of the thesis that we articulated. They're not cheaper. They're not faster. They're not more efficient. They're not going to cost less. They're not going to be distributed on coal plant sites. It is just
not going to First Nations territories.
It's not going to the oil sands.
They're not going to be mass produced in order to make steam, to steam tar sands, bitumen out of the ground.
My chief concern, which is not the money, it's the potential for fissile material production that could be useful for bombs.
Which is why the security costs are so high. So that's just another argument in the same direction. It's saying, look, these things aren't safer just because they're smaller. They're not safer. They're if you've got smaller ones and you've distributed them all over, here and yon in order to reduce the amount of distribution cost, how many wires you have to run and how many transformers you need and all that stuff. Which is one of the arguments that they have.
Well, yes, but quite apart from whether or not a country surrounds its plant with all of these wonderful technological safety features, which are so expensive, the question is, who owns these things? And if you're going to have every country in the world with its own small modular nuclear reactors, there's some of these guys I don't trust.
Agreed.
Let me talk directly to that point.
Yeah.
The only countries in the world that are allowed to have nuclear technology are pretty much the 30 that have it today.
Why is that? I don't see that. Because
nuclear non-proliferation treaties and prescribed technologies treaties prevent countries like Iran from getting nuclear fuel reprocessing stuff. That was what the entire Iran deal was about, and that's why it's coming back into force under Biden. Iran actually has nuclear generation plants. It was trying to create nuclear bombs and got shut down for that purpose. But there's only about 30 countries in the world that have nuclear power plants. Half of those are projecting the complete removal of them, and most of those don't have nuclear weapons.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, but it didn't fit anything I knew, because I thought the NPT basically said, everybody, if you promise to be good, we'll let you have access to peaceful nuclear technology. And in fact, everybody who is obliged to provide it for these countries. So even people who don't want to, everybody has to help underprivileged countries get peaceful nuclear technology, which could be small nuclear reactors, which could be, take a few little pieces of it home with you to make your own homemade nuclear bombs.
Except once again, it'll be probably dirty bombs wrapped in fertilizers.
Okay.
And that's actually my much bigger
Yeah,
concern.
I'm very much more worried about that than somebody actually managing to make a nuclear weapon. I'm much more concerned about people spreading radioactive material all over the place and causing panic and terror. My point is simply this: that if you distribute these things here and yon all over the place on numerous sites, your security problems just got that much worse.
That $1 trillion goes up.
Yeah, so it just gets harder and harder to do. But the economics get even more bizarre, because we live in a world where there is cheap wind and solar, and nobody's preventing it from being put on the grid, right? It's not like there's some cabal or consortium that says that wind and solar, even though they're cheap, we're not going to allow them on the grid. So now let's think about the way that nuclear power makes cheap electricity. One of the tricks they use is, first of all, they build them giant, right, to get that economy of scale I was talking about. So they make them really big as they can, and only number up from the biggest one they can make. And then they run them flat out, like pedal to the metal. They run them, and they claim that this thing that they call capacity factor, which is what fraction of the number of kilowatt hours it could possibly make running it flat out, that it actually makes. They run them at like 99% capacity factor, and they say, look, nuclear is so good, it's got this awesome capacity factor. 99% of the time, it's on making power, and at full output. And that's not a feature; that's a bug.
Yeah,
they have to run them that way.
Let's just take the Hinkley example. I know we're over, Metta, but just the Hinkley nuclear site in it's an EDF, a French-China consortium building the nuclear power plant at Hinkley in the UK. Before the most recent cost overruns and budget overruns and schedule overruns, the wholesale cost per kilowatt hour was 15 cents US per kilowatt hour, guaranteed for 35 years with inflation increases. So the only reason the French-China consortium would do it is if the UK government guaranteed every kilowatt hour that plant produced for 35 years was well above wholesale market value for electricity. I mean, Metta,
exactly.
just for context, you're spending roughly 12 cents per kilowatt hour where you are Canadian. That's about 9 cents US. That's retail price for you. And I'm spending less. I'm spending about that as less than that here. But they're saying 35 years at half again the retail price as the wholesale price. That's an inversion of economics that only works where ideology confounds common sense.
Where there's decisions being made on a basis other than what makes sense, yes.
Well, you've convinced me. I tell you, you didn't have to work hard.
No, you were against them to begin with.
You got a whole bunch more reasons to be against them now.
We also think you don't have to worry about them because the economics make so little sense compared to wind and solar.
Exactly.
That they're not going to get built.
Yeah.
All right, that's refreshing to hear. They're not going to get built. So everybody, take it easy. Have a good day. Don't worry. Be happy. and I'm happy because this was interesting and fun and useful. And I bet a lot of people are going to copy this and share it. Spread it around. Share
I'll get more hate from the thorium crowd now.
All right.